quick disclaimer before we start. This talk is mostly aimed at beginners, so if you're a NixOS expert, you might already know a good amount of the stuff here. But we still hope that you'll take away something new and be motivated to set up your own home server by the end of it. So with that being said, let's get started. So imagine you just bought your brand new mini PC and you want to set up a personal home server. Well, first let's install some software to it while it's still pristine and brand new. So let's say we want to set up a media server to share your personal media collection with your friends and family. Well, we can do that. Let's say we want to set it up with Docker. We'll have to write a Docker Compose file, get that set up, put that Docker Compose somewhere in our system, figure out what port this service is even using, open that in our firewall, and much, much more. Okay, that's fine. Let's say we want to set up a photo backup server. Okay, that's fine. Let's write another Docker Compose, put this somewhere else on our system, and then also open this port in our firewall. Okay, sure. Well, the more services you add, you end up repeating this dance over and over again. And by the end of it, it kind of gets out of hand. And if you're just a sole server maintainer, this can get very overwhelming very quickly. And we think this is madness. Today, we're going to be proposing a solution to this madness. My name is Anthony Tarbunian.
And my name is Samir Rashid, and we're presenting Nix Magic, the case for Nix on the home server. So we're both UC San Diego students, and let's get into it. What are the benefits of a Nix home server? Today we'll be discussing how Nix allows you to fearlessly modify your home server, easily keep track of system state, and make sure that managing your home server doesn't feel like your 9-to-5 job. So let's quickly go over some background. What is a home server? A home server enables you to host your own services on hardware that you own. You can host your own photo backup instead of relying on services like iCloud and Google Photos. And in addition, you can host other things like a media library, you can host your own website, and store your own backups. You can find self-hosted services for pretty much anything you can imagine. So is this going to be expensive? Well, no. A lot of people think you need a beefy PC or you need some rack-mounted case, but you really don't need anything. You can use just a NUC or a Raspberry Pi, which is pictured on the left, or just an Intel mini PC. There's many good reasons to make a home server. I think some of the good reasons are you can take back your freedom. You don't need to trust big tech with your data, worry about Google axing some service you use, or be at the mercy of VCs who are going to put ads in your paid product. Also, it's a lot of fun to play with software and have an environment where you can do anything. So what's Nix? The term Nix includes the language, the package manager, and the Linux distribution. The naming system is kind of complicated, but basically this is just an ecosystem built around the Nix package manager. We'll be talking about the Nix operating system, NixOS, which is a Linux distribution which includes the Nix package manager and allows you to configure things about your OS. But you don't need NixOS to take advantage of Nix. You can install just the Nix package manager to other OSs like Ubuntu or macOS. You use the Nix language to write a configuration. So when you write this configuration, it'll be written in the Nix language, and then you can build this file to declare everything that's on your system. Building your configuration means that Nix will install all the packages you specify, generate any config files, and start any services which you want. Unlike other package managers, Nix will do the same thing every single time. You should end up with the exact same system no matter where you build it, when you build it, or who builds it. This means you can write your configuration once and build your system anywhere. So Anthony, can you show us what writing a Nix config would look like in the wild?
Yes, so let's look at some real Nix configuration. So let's start off with explaining that Nix configs are just text files. The Nix language itself is a happy medium between a configuration format and a programming language. This is advantageous because it gives you access to things like functions, data structures, and variables. So let's look at this sample snippet of Nix configuration. So you can set up your system so that all your configuration is located in this configuration.nix file. And here we have a few lines. The important thing to note is that we're modifying this system packages variable. And this variable will store all the packages that you want Nix to install to your system. So by just looking at this, I can tell that my system will have Vim and Git installed. Okay, that's fine. Let's say I want to add a new package. Well, it's as simple as adding a single line to this configuration. If I add this line and I rebuild my system, I'll have access to something like tmux. Okay, this is cool. What else can I do? Well, you can configure settings of common services in your Nix config. Here we're setting an option for the SSH daemon. For context, this is just another part of that same configuration file we saw earlier. This means that you have full transparency into what's going on in your system. You can see all your services, how they're configured, and other stuff too. Here I can see that I'm enabling the SSH service and setting an option to block login attempts for the root user. This is nice to have this all in here because I don't need to go digging for the SSH config, which is somewhere on my system. It's all right here in my centralized Nix config. Okay, Samir, can you tell us how to get started on installing some services for our home server?
All right, let's look concretely at what it's like to set up a home server with and without Nix. First, let's try setting up Jellyfin, which is a popular open source media management software. So if you want to install Jellyfin on a traditional Linux system, the Jellyfin docs will suggest, oh, you should just curl our install script and pipe it into sudo bash. But, I mean, this is very suspicious. This script could be doing anything. We checked and it's just adding their apt repository and installing their package, but in general, the problem with running bash scripts is it can be difficult to revert their effects. You would have to, and you don't really know what it's doing. You'd have to figure out what packages it installed, what files it modified, and try to undo all of that manually. On Nix, if you want to do the same thing to install Jellyfin, it's just one line. You can write services.jellyfin.enable equals true in your config. And uninstalling this and removing everything Jellyfin put on your system is as easy as removing this line. But what is this line actually doing? When you build your system with this line in your config, Nix is going to take care of downloading and installing Jellyfin. And it'll build it if Jellyfin needs to be built. This is going to use a Jellyfin, or this is going to use a recipe that's inside of the Nix packages, which is Nix's package store. So as soon as we add this line and rebuild our system, we should have Jellyfin available in a matter of seconds. Let's say we want to add another service, like Samba, for sharing files over the network. Normally, when you're setting up a service that needs to be accessible by other computers over the network, you're going to have to open a firewall port. So on a normal, without Nix, in order to do this, we're going to have to first look up, okay, which ports is Samba going to use? And then, oh, what command am I going to have to run to do this? With Nix, all the state is in one place. Nix is going to handle the complexity of opening the port with this open firewall option. You just set that to true, and then Nix will open the port and do whatever it has to do. And then let's say one day later, we want to uninstall Samba. If we uninstall Samba without Nix, then this firewall port is going to stay open, and it'll have just left state across our system. But setting enable to false in Samba in our Nix config is going to undo any state change that has happened. Okay, now we have a few services running. Let's try and access these with some nice local domains rather than memorizing their IP address and port numbers. So we can use any reverse proxy. We'll just be using Nginx so that we can route everything through normal HTTP port numbers. So the first thing we're going to have to do, let's say we've installed Nginx without Nix on a non-Nix system. The first thing you're going to have to find is the Nginx's configuration file. So, okay, we'll look this up. We'll search this up on the internet. But maybe in a few weeks, I want to edit this file again. I'm going to forget where this file is located and have to look it up. So the first problem we're going to face is that there's too many config locations. Every file or every program is going to have their own configuration file. And this issue can bubble out of control, as you saw in the intro. All these programs are going to be littering your computer with configurations and dot files. Okay, let's say now that we've found this config file location, we want to add any setting. Well, Nginx uses a bespoke configuration language, which they invented for themselves and only they use. So we've faced another issue. When you're setting up a normal home server, you're going to be faced with tons of different configuration formats. Everything uses its own language or configuration format, and it's going to have its own set of options and quirks which you need to memorize. So Nix is going to solve this for us. To do the same just to set up Nginx, we can just put this snippet in our configuration. You can see this is going to route all incoming traffic to jellyfin.local to whatever Jellyfin's internal port number is. We don't need to worry about where the config files are going to get generated, where they're going to get put, or have to learn Nginx's configuration language. So you might be wondering where we're getting these options from. We didn't have to write any of this. This is all offered by Nix, and you can find all of Nginx's options in the Nix option search. So you can see here, if we search for services.nginx, there's 160 results, which list everything we can configure with Nginx. So in summary, Nix gives you less cognitive overload. You can define all your open firewall ports in one place, all your systemd services. There's only one config format for everything, and it's all in one place. So, Anthony, what else can Nix do for us?
Okay, let's look at another really powerful benefit we get from using Nix on our home server, which is reusability. So by default, Nix configs are modular. This makes it really easy to take a part of someone else's config and just copy paste it into our config, and things should just work. It's as simple as copying a snippet of a Docker Compose into yours and just running it. So setting up new software can be challenging. You have to go use an installer, you might have to modify some settings on your system, might have to mess with some networking settings, et cetera, et cetera. Also, if instructions online are out of date, you can spend hours and hours debugging why things are going wrong. Let's look at a notoriously hard problem with self-hosting, which is setting up your own mail server, which some consider to be the final boss of self-hosting. Mail servers are complex. You need a daemon to send mail, another to host your mail client. You might want some virus scanning software or a spam filter. Well, thankfully with Nix and the Nix community, there's already this amazing NixOS mail server project, which we can just use in our config. The entire setup is just this sample Nix config you see on the right. There's no manual steps to run, and if we just move this into our config, we'll end up with the exact same mail server as the person who made this. So it's not 20 pages of commands that you need to run. It's just a dozen lines of configuration that you can add to your own personal configuration. And if you can read it at the bottom, the only command you'll need to run is NixOS rebuild switch. This is so much easier than having to follow a project's potentially out-of-date instructions. The great thing here is there are no instructions to be out of date because there are no instructions. Once you experience the power of declarative configuration, you'll never want to go back. Let's look at another example for our home server, setting up a VPN. In this example, we're going to use WireGuard. And the use case here is, let's say we want to access our home server services from anywhere in the world, but we don't want to expose each service to the public internet. Well, we can just connect to the VPN and access everything that way. So similar to the previous example, there's a WireGuard example online. It's linked at the bottom if you go to that NixOS wiki page. So someone else has posted this, and you can really easily just take it and put it in your config. Just have to modify a few fields with the private keys and whatnot, or public keys. And yeah, and again, uninstalling is trivial. You just have to remove this config, or these few lines of config from your configuration, and WireGuard will just disappear. And the great thing is for something like this is Nix will take care of undoing any complicated networking setup that we might have had to do to get WireGuard set up and working. So on the topic of reusability, Nix makes it really easy to reuse your config across multiple machines. So imagine you want to SSH into your home server. Well, you don't want to feel like you're SSHing back into the 70s and be greeted by antiquated a diff utility looking like this on the right. Maybe you want something like what's on the left, which is called Delta, a modern diff utility. So with Nix, you can just copy your modern terminal utilities to use them wherever you go and even on your home server, which is really nice. So let's look at another huge advantage of using Nix on your home server, which is how it makes it painless and trivial to upgrade your server. So let's talk about why you might want to upgrade. It might seem obvious, but you might want new features of your services. Let's say Jellyfin releases a new version, you want a new feature. And security is also a huge concern. Every day there's new security bugs being found, and those same bugs are being patched all the time. So you want to make sure you're always up to date so you don't end up being the victim of the next log4j. So on a system like Debian or Ubuntu, which your home server might be in, you might run a command like sudo apt-get upgrade and move on with your day. And you might be thinking, okay, this is fine, but like, what could go wrong? Well, it turns out a lot. There are many things that could go awry. Maybe the latest version of Jellyfin has a dependency conflict, or maybe there's a bug in a new release and you want to move back to a previous state. Does this really happen? Are there really like issues with dependency conflicts? Yes, trust me, I know. Also, you can see like many users online have faced the same issue, especially the one at the top, which has been viewed 1.5 million times over the course of 11 years since it's been posted. Also, there's a notorious example of Linus Tech Tips breaking his system when he tried to install, I think it was Steam, on Pop! OS, so with apt. So yeah. So with Nix, or with something like apt, it's impossible to roll back. Whereas with Nix, it's very easy with this NixOS rebuild rollback command. So yeah, you can always move back to a previous working state. Some would argue that you could do the same thing with apt. There's some commands like apt update, -- fix missing, but those don't really provide a complete solution. They're more of a band-aid to try to give a best effort to try to fix things. Whereas with Nix, you know for sure that if you had a working state before, you'll be able to move back to that working state. This is also really advantageous for a home server scenario because you want your home server to be up all the time, and if something goes wrong during an upgrade, you can really easily just move back to keep your services up and running. Let's talk about like how rollbacks actually work or what they are. So every time you build your system with that NixOS rebuild command, it'll create a new version, or we call it generation. So here you can see on this boot screen, we can see the past generations that I've built with Nix. And then when I boot, I can switch to whichever one I want. It's like having Git for your whole system. You can move back to working versions seamlessly. Technically, some might argue you could achieve the same thing with things like file system snapshots, if you've heard of file systems like Btrfs. The problem with those solutions is they manage every file on your computer, not just system state like configuration files and application binaries, whereas Nix won't touch any of your user data, which is really handy. So how does this thing work under the hood? Well, it's just symlinks all the way down. When you upgrade, Nix won't overwrite existing packages. So let's look at this example here. So let's say my current system is on the thing on the top, system1 link, and I currently have a version of Jellyfin, let's say the stable version. Okay, sure, let's say I want to upgrade to the unstable one, but oh wait, there's a bug, or I don't know, I don't like how the UI looks now, I don't know. Well, with Nix, I can really easily just revert back to the old version, and it's just a matter of like changing the symlink to the previous version of Jellyfin. So this is a really powerful model, and it also helps in the case of version pinning. So let's say you want the latest version of some package, but you don't want your entire system to have to move to unstable. Well, with Nix, you can do this. You don't have to go get onto a bleeding edge distro like Arch, where it's either all or nothing. You don't have to bleed to access the bleeding edge. Also, in the case of having the most stable packages, you don't have to move to something like Debian, where it's also all or nothing, and everything is just super ancient and stable. With Nix, you get the best of both worlds. And this is impossible to do with other package managers. If you look on the right, you'll see this graph here. So we have a package that depends on two dependencies, or two libraries, which have their own dependencies. And normally it's impossible to have or the same dependency and have multiple versions of that the two packages rely on. With Nix, you can do this and have as many different combinations of dependencies and packages that you want. You can also see the little snippet at the bottom. That's a little indicator of the kinds of things you can do. So here we only want to have Jellyfin use the unstable version. And this is great because it doesn't mess up anything else on our system. The rest of our system is still unstable, and we can experiment freely and not have to worry. So so we've been talking about how great Nix is. Let's compare it to a popular tool for managing home servers, which is Docker. So Docker is great in the sense that most home server applications are geared towards running in Docker. The vast majority of projects already have a Docker image available. You don't have to do anything else. You just kind of pull it and run it. Whereas with Nix, the Nix packages repo is great. There's like a lot of packages, but you might run into things that aren't there, and you might have to manually package some things yourself. We'll get to some ways to get around this later. Also with Docker, it ends up encouraging you to leave Docker Compose files all over your system. You might set up one project, and then you want to set up another service, and that's going to be in some other folder. But Nix, you kind of get this benefit for free, where all your configuration is in one place. Also with Docker, versioning is opt-in. You're kind of relying on whoever's maintaining your image to make sure to tag it correctly with the right numbers and everything. Whereas with Nix, you get this for free as well. It's super easy to roll back, as we just mentioned. Also, Docker is not really tied into the rest of your system, whereas Nix is. You can basically control almost anything on your system with Nix. So, also on the topic of Docker, you don't have to choose. You can have the best of both worlds. So there's Nix options that actually let you start up Docker containers on boot. And also, you can pin Docker images to use a specific hash. I ran into a use case where I was using trying to get this photo backup service called the Image Setup. And unfortunately, Image doesn't have options in the Nix options. But it has a working Docker Compose. So I took my Docker Compose, and I used this really cool utility called Compose to Nix. You can find the GitHub over there. And I ran this on the Docker Compose, and it generated a fully working Nix file that would just spawn up that same Docker container. And this was great because I could just integrate this Nix file into the rest of my system and not have to worry about random Docker Composes all over the place. So I highly recommend you check this one out. Okay, so Samir, can you tell us how Nix stacks up to Ansible?
Sure. A lot of sysadmins commonly use Ansible to try and achieve the same things that Nix can guarantee. But there's a lot of downsides with Ansible. The first thing is that if Ansible does something wrong or something breaks when you're using Ansible, it may not always be possible to go back. For example, you can't really undo an OS update with Ansible, whereas Nix has rollbacks built in, and it's completely free with Nix. Also, Ansible will it'll do its best job to take you between states, but sometimes it's impossible to go from one state to another, and you're relying on other people to have built mechanisms to do that. Also, Ansible is notoriously slow. Every time you run it, it'll have to check a bunch of things about your system. Whereas Nix is lazy, kind of like me, it'll only do the bare minimum to rebuild your system and take you to build whatever system you want to make. If running Ansible stops in the middle for some reason, for any reason, it could break your system since it's just modifying things directly on your system. Whereas Nix builds are atomic. Nix will be writing to the Nix store and doing whatever work it needs to do, but when you switch systems, the symlink switching is atomic. It'll happen instantly, and you can't break. Nix is not going to update programs while you're using it. It can't break whatever's running. And it's easy to drift away from Ansible's state, because Ansible will allow you to just run arbitrary commands on your computer as usual, whereas Nix limits what you're able to do, and it's going to be controlling things using symlinks to the Nix store. So Ansible is trying to bolt on determinism and declarative environments when your OS really isn't that reproducible. But Nix is locking things down and making sure that things are going to behave as you expect. So we've been talking about the good parts of Nix, but there are some rough edges. For example, the Nix packages is just made by everyone. Anyone can contribute. So there may not be options for everything you expect. For example, the open firewall option isn't on every single package, which can be kind of annoying. Also, the Nix user base is not that big compared to people who use containers, so there's less documentation, which can be kind of hard if you enter an edge case. And this is definitely not helped by Nix's confusing error messages. Also, when you do find documentation, Nix's community is currently split on whether to adopt the standard called Flakes. So finding documentation with the different standards can be kind of confusing. And Nix's line of thinking works a little bit differently. There's a little bit of friction to do everything, but if you do use the Nix way of building your system, you're going to eliminate a bunch of problems. But in summary, is Nix better? Yeah, I would say so. Nix is freeing. You don't want managing any server to feel like your full-time job. And configuration.nix is completely self-documenting. You're going to get an overview of all the system state in one place, and you don't have to worry about breaking your system when you make changes. So let's take a look at what Nix offers. You get fearless modifications with rollbacks. You don't have to worry about your system breaking because you can always go back, and it's going to happen. Rollbacks are pretty much instant. Configuration.nix is just a text file which anyone can read. I can read anyone's system config and pretty much figure out what's on it. And with reusable components, you can reuse work that other people have done, and you don't have to worry about the quirks of setting up every single system package you want. So you definitely should try this at home. If you follow this link, you'll come to our GitHub page where you can follow some instructions for setting up your own server and following what we did basically in this presentation. You absolutely should try this, and if you want to get your friends to use Nix, this is a great place for them to start without, I don't know, killing their own laptop by installing NixOS. But yeah, using Nix is a vote for the future of declarative software. And with that, thank you for attending our talk.